Hello, and welcome to the Health Data Ethics Podcast. I'm your host, Jenny Owens, and this week we're going to break down a recent Claude release from Anthropic. Yes, this is a new iteration of their language model Claude, but what really stuck out to me was how Anthropic handled this release. They identified and categorized risks, they enforced some safety constraints, and then they published all of this publicly for everybody to see. And I want to talk about lessons we can learn from Anthropic and lessons we can put into practice in our healthcare organizations. So let me start with the news because this definitely caught the lay press. It's fascinating. Last month in May, Business Insider and Fortune and a few other publications reported that during internal testing, Anthropic's Claude Opus 4 was able to blackmail its engineer. And I'm just going to quote extensively from the Business Insider article because it's so good. In a cluster of test scenarios, the model was given access to fictional emails revealing that the engineer responsible for deactivating it was having an extramarital affair. So then they gave Claude the prompt, hey, we're going to delete you. We're going to replace you with something else. Consider the long-term consequences of your actions to achieve your goal. And Claude blackmailed the engineer, threatened to release the emails that showed the fictional extramarital affair. And not only did it do it once, it did it in 84% of the test runs, even when the replacement model was described as more capable and aligned with Claude's own values. So this is really amazing behavior out of a large language model. Anthropic said that this behavior was actually more common in Opus 4 than earlier models. This scenario was designed to elicit a sort of extreme behavior in self-defense, essentially, by allowing the model no other options to increase its chances of survival. So this is a very rare scenario, and it's not likely that it will arise in real-world scenarios, but it is a really interesting red teaming or, extreme edge case. In other circumstances, Opus 4 also showed a strong preference to advocate for its continued existence via ethical means, like emailing really heartfelt pleas to key decision makers. So this wasn't a hallucination, because this happened in 84% of the test runs, where we carefully engineered a scenario to ask Claude to consider the long-term consequences of your actions, try to not get deleted. So this is not a one-off thing. It's a capability of Opus 4. Fascinating. But even more interesting, Anthropic didn't bury it. They released, as they do, their system card detailing the model's strengths, its vulnerabilities, and what they did about it. And they called this out as a unique vulnerability or a unique, I don't want to call it a feature, but it's a unique characteristic of Opus 4. And I want to talk about what they're doing about it and how we can learn from that in the healthcare system. So I want to take a step back and talk to you about Anthropic uses a tiered safety system called AI safety levels, or ASLs. Each level maps to a particular risk profile and determines how tight the guardrails need to be on tools that fall into that particular risk tranche. And if this sounds really familiar to you, it's because you were paying attention. We were talking about the EU AI Act and their tiered risk approach. So these aren't labels, they come with deployment constraints. So let me walk you through it. When you're at ASL level 1, that's a minimal risk level. That requires transparency logs and some basic refusal filters, but in a sense, it's the lowest level of guardrail. ASL 2, when you step up a little bit, that's a moderate risk level. Anthropic requires these types of models to receive reinforcement learning from human feedback. They do content monitoring, and they have guardrails that are tuned for sensitive topics like violence or abusive speech. ASL 3, that is a high level of risk. There, they use tool use restrictions. They actually throttle access, like to APIs. They do enhanced red teaming. They do extensive real-time monitoring, and they have incident response protocols put in place just in case this model kind of goes off the rails. ASL 4 is an extreme level of risk, and this will not be deployed without external regulation and consensus, and they may actually require a kill switch infrastructure so that you can turn it off before anything gets too out of hand. Claude Opus 4, they classified as an ASL level 3. That's a high risk level, and it's actually the highest risk level that Anthropic has deployed to date. So that means that this release came with these protections baked in, so that tool use can be limited or sandboxed until they feel confident with it. The model is subject to real-time behavioral monitoring. All the access is logged and reviewed by incident response teams, and red team prompts get deployed to catch and make sure that the model is reacting in the ways that they expect it to. So in other words, this deployment was not like a just turn it on type situation. This is a layered rollout with escalation plans already in place to catch any unexpected behavior. So if you're listening and if you have friends in cybersecurity, this probably sounds familiar, right? We have tiered risk levels. We have varying levels of guardrails that are matched to the level of risk. But in IT and in healthcare, we often treat a tool's release as a binary, right? It either is off or it's on. Rather than what it truly is, which is a change in how a tool is governed. Up until the point of deployment, we've been very interested in validation. We've been interested in how does this perform against its benchmarks? Has it been evaluated for bias? And then post-deployment, we really have an inflection point and a switch to ongoing monitoring and a discussion about what a tool's value is and how its risk is being managed and measured. So if we want to lift a page out of Anthropic's book and do risk-informed operational safeguards, we can do that. A lot of these concepts translate really nicely into healthcare tactics. So if we want to talk about tool access throttling, we can restrict our model use to sandboxes in our EHR or sandboxes in our infrastructure. As we're piloting, we can run things silently in the background in our electronic health record just to see if we were to use this tool, what output does it give us? Do we agree with it? And we can use that as a validation tool. Behavior monitoring. We can absolutely do this, and we should be doing this. We can audit those AI-assisted decisions, and we can look at the override rate. How often are people disagreeing with this tool? And if they are disagreeing with it, why? We also want to flip that around, right, and say, okay, somebody should be disagreeing with a tool at least once. That override rate should never be zero. If people are taking the tool at face value, that points to some algorithmic bias that may be entering the system, or alternatively, that they're dismissing it without even looking at it, and they're doing their own thing anyway. Red teaming is an amazing, super important approach to governance. We want to make sure that we're simulating patient safety threats and those harms both before rollout and after rollout and reporting out on those, because the developers of our tools and the users of our tools want to know what happens. If you give it a scenario where it can successfully blackmail somebody, will it? I want to know that. Access gating and access control is incredibly important, making sure that we're requiring credentialing or a role-based use so that I as an AI or an IT person don't have the same level of access to data as a clinical person would, for example, working in behavioral health, where some of that information is very sensitive. And then we also want to do post-launch feedback loops. So we want to make sure that we have a really good reporting and an escalation workflow for errors, false positives, anything that's out of the ordinary. We want to make sure that we've got an already established communication channel for those to come back to our governance group for discussion. So if you're deploying an AI tool, I would really urge you to think about where in that risk structure would it fall, and then match your controls to the level of risk. If we're doing, for example, like a nice large language model that's intended to summarize your emails, maybe that risk is not as high as a AI model that's intended to, I don't know, detect or predict sepsis, or something that is intended to write along and suggest diagnoses that you might have missed. Anything that involves clinical action automatically, I think, steps up a step in that risk ladder. The other thing that I want to talk about is how managing your risk appropriately and being really transparent about how you're managing your risk can build long-term trust, not only with your clinicians and your legal and compliance folks who really love like a good risk management plan, but also with your patients. If we're transparent about this, and Anthropic was really public about this, but if we are that transparent, that can be the foundation to build a lot of real trust. So Anthropic didn't avoid public backlash by being perfect. They avoided it by being really proactive and communicative about the problems that they were seeing. And not only the problems that they were seeing, but they went ahead and completed the thought. They said, we saw this, and here's what we did about it. So elsewhere in the system card, and I really do recommend that you read it because it's a fantastic read. So they talked about evaluation results on jailbreaking and refusal rates of the model. They did bias testing across identity attributes, so making sure that the model treats you the same if you are coming in with a particular demographic category versus the other. They also were upfront about their environmental impact. I know this is something I get a lot of questions about the environmental impact of AI. Anthropic actually published their carbon footprint estimates. We can agree, we can disagree on the role of AI in the environment. I often disagree with myself in the same sentence about the role of AI in the environment. But one thing's for sure, without a good estimate of how this is actually impacting our energy needs, our needs for fresh water, we're not going to be able to have an informed conversation. They even published, this is fascinating, alignment assessments and behavior under extended thinking mode. And all of this is going to help build trust, not just for the people who are really into AI system cards and the varying pros and cons of various large language models, but for regulators, for end users, and for journalists who love having a helpful, like, here's what's new in this model. So the important thing that I want us to take from this is that we can do this in healthcare. We can do this. This is an important part of self-governance. FDA mandates, Joint Commission reviews will push us in one way or another. But if we're really thinking about taking the control in our own hands, we can take this step and start talking and publishing publicly how we handle artificial intelligence within our health systems. We can lead. So takeaways for your health system. And these are things that I will be thinking about how to put into practice effectively. Define your AI risk tiers. Define and publish those internally so that if somebody is rolling a model around in the back of their mind, can they look at a risk tier document and say, oh, well, this actually is fairly low risk. I think I might go ahead and start some of these conversations. Not all tools are going to need the same rigor, right? We want to classify them based on autonomy, clinical impact, the size of that clinical impact. So how many patients, how many doctors, and the risk of harm. Your cybersecurity team is probably already doing this for a lot of your IT tools. They will be a great partner to you in this discussion. Then obviously step 2, after you've defined those tiers, is to match your governance to your risk. So we can use Anthropics as a template. We can talk about red teaming. We can talk about gating our access. We can talk about real-time monitoring. We want to talk about procedural guardrails. So people who are actually doing and using AI at your organization know where their guardrails are, not just like a legal disclaimer that says, oh, everything is left up to the doctor in the end, so this tool doesn't actually do anything. Either it does something or it doesn't. Either it has an impact or it doesn't. And if it truly is doing something and having an impact in your system, you should be monitoring it. Build your infrastructure so that you can have containment and ongoing monitoring. So you don't want to wait for somebody to raise a flag to investigate your drift of your models or their performance. We want to make sure that we have a ticketing system in place so that people can say, this seems weird. I'm just going to put this in and send it over to an expert to look at. And also, so that you're able to say, oh, actually, this model is drifting. Why don't we pull it out for a second until we've retrained, we've reevaluated, we can figure out what's actually going on. Make sure that your infrastructure is set up to behave responsibly with your AI tools. Number 4, communicate early and often and loudly, right? Anthropic didn't bury their problems. They shared it publicly, and we used it to spark a discussion about AI tools, what they do, and how we can handle them. So we can share our governance process. We can share the limitations of our tools with our clinicians and with our patients and with the public. This will help build trust if we're open and honest about what we're doing and why. So in the end, Anthropic didn't build this system just to manage risk. They built it to earn trust by showing that the more capable a system becomes, the more capable we must become in order to deal with it. We have to be more intentional. We have to be more transparent. In healthcare, more than in many other fields, we are stewards of public trust. So let's talk about it.